Aschalon, Whisper of Swords series, written by Clint Dawson, narrated by Jez Jameson. Chapter 1. The world's a funny place, depending on how you look at it, nephew. History will tell you it is black and white, good and evil, strong and weak. The truth, Aroth, is that conquerors paint the reality. They write the history, and we believe them. Tegan rode atop a beautiful black stallion. Prince Tegan was of the house of Fengel. He was the 30-year-old second son to King Bartholomew of the Kingdom of Gondwana. He was a 5'11", lean, bronze-skinned brunette. Tegan's deep auburn eyes, ever shifty, sat above a long nose and clean-shaven baby face. Always the elegant dresser, his leather vest and pants were adorned by a regal gold-fringed blue riding cape. His nephew, Prince Aroth, son of Bartholomew the Younger, reigned in his horse next to one of the many lush pools in the Gondwana countryside. Aroth, unlike his uncle, was pale and blonde, towering above him by 3 or 4 inches. 15 years of age, Aroth carried himself as high-born, elegantly dressed in the house's red and gold crest colours. Jewellery adorned his neck and fingers, all pure gold. "Uncle," Aroth said, "we are the conquerors. The histories are correct as stated by our forefathers and the old religion." Aroth loved Tegan dearly, but detested his wordy lectures and history lessons. It seemed to Aroth that his uncle's sole purpose in life was to inform him of any and every detail. Tegan was often long-winded. His passion was knowledge. If Tegan was not out travelling or wooing ladies, he was reading and writing. Aroth was often the recipient of a verbose lecture on how the world should work. He often took his uncle's goings-on in stride, but never failed to show his frustration by the end of the conversation. "The old religion," scoffed Tegan hesitantly. "Ah, yes, the gods and monsters and mythical creatures beyond the frozen sea. Since your father has deemed it unnecessary for you to school in the great philosophical halls of Pavos, as every high-born should, you realize the king wants you trained in the ways of the world, not just with a sword in your hand." Tegan parched his thirst from their long ride. He stared for a moment at his reflection in the shimmering pool until a dragonfly skimmed across the surface and disrupted his reflection. Gathering his thoughts and clearing his throat, Tegan continued, "Knowledge provides opportunity. Opportunity brings out the worst in tyrants, but the best in admirable men." "You mean good men, do you not?" placated Aroth with feigned interest. He played with his jewel-encrusted rings as he stared out over the pond. "No, I mean admirable men. Men are arrogant, and arrogance is death. We never turn into the best we can be. We can only hope to become the best version of what we are. A sharp mind is a seed that plants that garden." Tegan dismounted his horse and sat beside the pool, refilling his water pouch. Aroth crinkled his face in annoyed confusion. "Why must you always speak in riddles? Life cannot be that complicated. I know the histories. Several thousand years ago the world was a great empire ruled by Barth. His children squabbled and killed almost a third of the population. His 9 grandchildren forged the 9 kingdoms. Our family crest is one of the 3 remaining original houses." Tegan smiled, sitting in silence. He watched Aroth pace back and forth, showing his annoyance at the lecture. Aroth gripped the hilt of his pearled sword as he continued. "When I am king, the whole of the Western continent will bow before me. There is no time for divided loyalties and democratic words. I do not understand why grandfather allows the northern provinces to play kings. 4 lords who want to play gods in their castles." Any conversation about feudal rule infuriated Aroth. He was a strong believer in an aristocracy. This was not necessarily because of the influence of his parents, but Aroth's interpretation of King Bartholomew's absolute rule. "The provinces of Delphinus have been self-governed for almost 800 years. Let the 4 lords be. Your grandfather is not to blame. A good king does not rule by fear," Tegan counselled. Aroth slapped his hand against the hilt of his sword as he stopped mid-pace to respond. Inciting fear shows strength, Aroth barked, biting his lip. If we united the whole of the continent, we could rebuild the world to what it once was. Tegan did not let Aroth's sudden tantrum faze him. Instead, he shifted atop his perched seat on a rock and reached into his pocket for his pipe. He stayed silent as he packed it, looking across the pool with a smile on his face. Aroth stared intently at Tegan, waiting for a reply. "Well?" Aroth asked impatiently. His knuckles began to whiten with the hold he had on his sword's hilt. "Oh," smiled Tegan. "I am surprised that your grace allows me to speak." "Uncle, whatever are you talking about? You know we can always speak plainly to one another." "Indeed," agreed Tegan, shaking his head. "However, until you are king, you will learn your place and respect your elders. You are passionate, but you do not know your ignorance. Most men go to the grave stupid. I do not intend our house to be such men. I will never be a king, nor do I wish to." Aroth interrupted him with a laugh. "Who would not want to be?" Tegan ignored the question and took a deep breath before continuing. 1,000 years ago, when the sea split the continent, it was chaos. Brother separated against brother. Kingdoms were broken, and they forgot alliances. We coexist with the northern provinces because life depended on it. Are they bastard cousins of ours? Yes? Centuries removed out, and history writes what it will. They are lords of noble birth. They are necessary allies for the people to survive. Put your ideologies of empires and kings behind you. People create wealth. We are the happy byproduct that gets to enjoy such wealth. Learn, eat, drink, rule." Aroth walked over to his horse as he prepared to mount it. He said nothing as he waited for Tegan to mount his horse. As they began riding back to the capital, the lush landscape of Gondwana lay before them. The countryside was vibrant with green foliage and fertile farmland. As Tegan and Aroth approached the capital gates of Anthem, its 60-foot-tall, 14-foot-thick walls encompassed the horizon. The city stretched for 2 miles along the coast of Shippers Bay. Outside of the city walls was a dense forest stretching as far as the eye could see on its western and southern sides. Of its 3 double-plated steel gates, Anthem's main entrance faced north, looking out at the Merchant Road. 8 battle keeps, each 20 feet high, adorned the walls every 1/4 of a mile. Spread out over the greenish-blue water, Gondwana's 50 warships lay docked in Shippers Bay, a testament to their amassing fleet in the world. Each full mast of the ships brandished the Fengal family crest, a 3-headed cobra painted gold upon a crescent-red background. Anthem had 3 inner walls separating the living district, the market district, the religious temple district, and lastly the royal palace grounds. The architecture was interwoven with red and brown masonry lined with gold trim on all official buildings. Yellow and maroon murals painted the building windows. As Tegan and Aroth walked through the upper path leading to the palace, they passed through the golden-plated archway into the hanging gardens that led to the courtyard. Among the hanging gardens, they came across Aroth's mother, Amelia. Amelia was surrounded by handmaidens tending to her full brown hair that hung down to the lower curve of her back. Amelia's high cheekbones showed a rigid but beautiful face. Her full lips, long narrow nose, and piercing eyes were complemented by her olive skin. She had eyes that turned from grey to green, depending on how the sunlight struck them at a certain angle. She wore a simple but elegant laced outer gown, as one might wear during an informal gathering of the city's socialite circle. She reached out and caressed Aroth's arm as he gently acknowledged her and continued up the winding path to the courtyard. Tegan bristled away all but one handmaiden doing Amelia's hair with a wave of his hand. As an afterthought, he waved back the servant girl attending to the wine, as he took a cup from her hands. Leaning against the cobblestone fence behind him, he took a quick sip of his wine before speaking. Amelia, where is that brother of mine? Attending to another of Father's council meetings, no doubt. Amelia's silken voice replied, You know that I do not keep track of my husband's whereabouts. He will find you if he is looking for you. But you know this, so why ask me something to which you already have the answer? Tegan smiled, continuing to take small sips of his wine. He took the wine basin from the servant girl and waved her away. Aroth is an ambitious young man, chaste but unchecked. I would hate to think his parents care so little about his tutelage to encourage his participation in listening with his mouth shut. Are the historical, religious teachings of Pavos not honourable for a high-born like himself? Aroth has his own mind, Tegan. That is not anything new. I guide him by suggestion only. I will not counter Bartholomew on his actions with our son. Amelia glanced down as she dismissed her hairdresser. There is not much to be done. I have known figureheads who have accomplished far greater deeds with minimal effort, dear sister. Oh yes, you are a queen in waiting. You will be the queen of our next king, and the mother of his successor after that. Surely you would take heed of my concern in the education of your son. To what end, Tegan? While a title ensures my place in this dynasty of kings, it is not I who has the heart of my husband. Do not mock me with your riddles and perversions. Do you ever tire of tricking with your wordplay, or is it just that your manhood has shriveled and you have nothing else to occupy your time? Tegan chuckled softly under his breath. He took Amelia's hand and brought it up to his lips. Forgive me, dear lady. I did not mean to offend. I am constantly on guard against the stupidities of men, so that sometimes I forget when a match of wit stands before me. Amelia pulled her hand back from Tegan's hold. Tegan continued, The simple fact of the matter is this. Aroth needs to learn the history and doings of the world, whether you and Bartholomew want it. Father commissioned me for Aroth's tutorship when it was clear he would not be schooling in Pavos. I love him dearly, but he is brash and ill-tempered like his father, queried Amelia. Like a child of the commoners. If Aroth is to one day rule, he must put aside his disdain for what he thinks he knows, and learns what he does not. Aroth will need to be ready before he is the crown prince. With father's health, that may not be many years off. Tell me, Amelia interrupted in a weathered, tenacious tone, do you care? Or are you so disturbed because you will never be in a position of power that you must manipulate how a young prince will be moulded into a king? Tegan's chuckle turned to laughter. One does not have to be a king to be powerful, Amelia. I am not an ambitious person. I wish to live my life the way I came into it, naked, oblivious, with my mouth around a supple breast. Amelia recoiled from the description of such things. Tegan noticed this and added, I merely meant to belay your fears. You know I love Aroth. I just want what is best for him. If you want what is best for him, Tegan, then stop trying to be his father. Teach him as you must, but it is not your responsibility how he uses his schooling. He is a boy becoming a man. Let him grow. He has his father's blood. He will be a good king. Forcing him to think as you do will not enjoy him to whatever wisdom you claim to possess. Amelia's voice trailed off as she scanned the garden. We should keep our private conversations to a minimum. I do not like idle gossip, and in the capital everyone has ears. What is gossip but idle truths? The same could be said about Aroth's true parentage, Tegan said as Amelia raised her hand to slap him. He grabbed her hand and put it back down by her side. Do not hate me for the sins of my brother. Amelia leered at him in contempt. Her piercing gaze turned from grey to green as her face grew crimson. Do not speak to me privately again. As you will, but if you wish to dictate how and when I approach you, perhaps actually retire somewhere in private. The Hanging Gardens is hardly a place for solitude. If you excuse me, I must see to Father's council meeting. I do have words there that will be considered. Good day, my lady. Tegan looked about as he walked up to the cobblestone steps to the main keep. He always considered himself a man of the people. He felt most comfortable when he was away from the machinations of the court. The stiffness of nobles infuriated him, and the manipulative games of politics tired him. Unlike his brother, Prince Bartholomew the Younger, and heir apparent, he did not look down upon the common folk. There was a vibrant realism in their eyes when they spoke. It was this feeling that he wished to hold on to, that he was nobility, but would never have to lead. He loved it. He loved the accolades of the established, while hating the establishment itself. Often shying away from ambitious roles in government, which he deemed tedious, it was with great chagrin Tegan now trudged into the council chamber. After being absent for 2 months abroad, he had been summoned home by his father to participate in a council meeting. The messenger sent to him had said it was of significant economic and political longevity for the realm. The council chamber was lined with rectangular pearl pillars that came up from the flooring and stood at 4 feet high. Each was adorned by a jewelled ornament. As Tegan walked into the chamber, all communication stopped as all eyes turned to him. Seated at the head of the oak rectangle table was King Bartholomew, 6th of his name, 64th of his house, whose true, undisputed lineage traced back 1,000 years at the time of the Great Split. He sat in his chair, a hearty 62-year-old. His sinewy arms were folded across his square chest, sitting atop a fat belly. His hair was silver grey, with chops as full as his facial whiskers. A deep scar ran from the top of his left temple down to the top of his ruby-red cheekbones. Next to the king sat Bartholomew the Younger. He was in his early 40s. His beard was straight and auburn with a curl at the base of his chin. To the king's other side sat Saradite, a full figure of a woman with long blonde curly hair and blue eyes. She looked no older than 25, but was at least in her late 30s. Down the row of tables sat Lord Blackburn and Havenport, army and fleet commanders respectively. Both men were weathered and aged face. Blackburn was a stout fellow with pocked skin and irregular complexion. He appeared to be a heavy drinker. Havenport was tall, frail, almost to the point of bone in stature, but not in colour. He was a seafaring man who lived off a vegetarian diet and cooked fish. None could be said to have skipped more of a meal than Havenport. Tegan walked past the end chair at the empty side of the table. Everyone still silent. He sat down next to Havenport, crossed one leg over the other, and put his hands rested in a fist on the table. King Bartholomew cleared his throat. It is retrospective that right here, right now, in this fabric of time, we today can shape the future of hundreds of thousands of people by our actions and the strength of our words. Still, among the corners of the world, other such gatherings of nobility, traitors, zealots, and misconstrued rabble are having like-minded conversations to the same effect. Therefore, it is easy to ascertain that the world does not revolve around one's own arse. How kind, Tegan, to attend one council meeting in the last 2 months. Tegan's playful smirk was nowhere to be seen as all eyes turned to him. He scanned the faces of everyone in the room, noting his brother's self-aware smile. It was no secret that the king had long been displeased in his son's insufficient interest in politics. He did not blame him, as he would never hold any real place in court besides an adviser or a general if he so chose. In times of peace there was little need for generals, and Tegan was not receptive to taking a position for the sake of doing so. He and his father had discussed it at length. Tegan, your mind's made for war, the king once said. Peacetime is no place for you as long as I rule. You can be a voice of reason for everyone but yourself. I have never seen a man so hard-pressed to not follow his own advice. It was evident that the king expected a response. Tegan feared no man, no situation. His father was the one person he never had smart words of wisdom or riddles for. Yet here he was, the prodigal son returned from one of his many trips abroad among the people. He could feel the tension in the room. Something had happened, or some pivotal event was about to happen. The king rarely made it inclusionary that his second-born son must be at a council meeting. Tegan's response felt like an eternity, with all eyes piercing at him. "Forgive me for my tardiness, Your Grace." Tegan nodded towards his father. King Bartholomew seemed to take the acknowledgment as satisfactory. With sleight of hand in Tegan's direction, he motioned. "I have had over 20 years on the throne. In that time, not so much as a whiff of a challenge has troubled Gondwana. Now, I have heard rumours that one of the northern provinces has grown discontent with their place on the continent. One of the northern houses is ransoming high-born rivals to the penal colony on Clafford. This is an affront to all the laws of men. Who they are doing it for is immaterial. This illicit practice of political slavery must be rooted out immediately. Lord Havenport." Havenport's squeaky voice cracked as he wriggled in his chair. "My captains report increasing naval activity in the northern shores by way of the night. The provinces of Essia and Norcia have no fleet. Wesson or Sufford is ferrying prisoners under cover of night to the port of Nam. I highly doubt he is aware of the treachery coming into his harbour." Bartholomew quipped up harshly. "It is not your place for conjecture, Lord Havenport. Report the details. The king will decide what it means." King Bartholomew waved his hand as Havenport barred to respond. "Bartholomew will sail with the fleet of the evening tide to intercept such vessels. Tegan will travel north with a handful of men and find the source of this underground deception. Let us not be rash, but I will bring the provinces to heel if they are trafficking any subjects to that hellish fate." Blackburn spoke in turn. "Your Grace, what of the other matter?" Bartholomew locked eyes with Tegan with a whimsical smile. Tegan did not like his brother's look. Over 10 years his junior, Tegan and his brother, while closer children, had grown apart in their older years. This was not a time for such discord among the council. Tegan stayed silent but knew what was coming next was of his brother's own making. "Where will he send me off to when this is over?" Tegan pondered to himself. The king spoke after a pause. "Tegan, it is time to solidify our hold over the provinces. I do not wish conquest or war, but the sanctity of our house will not be questioned, will not be challenged. It is high time you find a wife and bring the provinces into the fold. As Wesson's lord is old and his wife barren, his cousin Lord Renon of Essia will inherit upon his death. You will wed Renon's daughter, and only child, thus bringing half of the north into the fold." "Father, I am your son. I would bleed every drop of our house and this realm." "But Lord Renon's daughter is promised to the Lord of Sufford," Tegan reminded him hesitantly. "The nobles of Sufford are bastards by birth. They make oaths on whims, and for personal gain. Ulbeck is not a godly man and has dozens of bastards. Do you think Lord Renon wishes his daughter to be betrothed to an ungodly man? It is done. When you discover the source of this slave practice, we will travel north to Essia for the engagement feast." "As you command, Your Grace." "Good." King Bartholomew stood up from his chair, bracing his fists on the table. "It is done. Lord Havenport and Bartholomew will set sail on the evening tide. Tegan, tomorrow at dawn you will ride north to the provinces to root out this evil. I will expect word from both of you on your findings before a month has passed." Bartholomew and Saradite, who had remained silent this whole time, walked past Tegan. The lords followed the king out of the hall. Tegan looked over at the red and gold-tinted windows. He slowly pulled himself up from his chair, looking out across the hanging gardens into the city below. Tegan was torn over the thought of marrying Renon's daughter. Every fibre of his being was against being used in a political ploy. While he was decisive and methodical in his actions and his rhetoric, he detested using those means to justify some political end. How stupid was he to think that he could escape this role his entire life. He was the second son to a king, a man destined not to do great things, but still expected to be a tool to heap great things upon the men destined to be born into them. If there was one thing he knew, he would not allow himself to be a mindless pawn. Tegan's head was pounding. Gone were the days of travelling and a good drink, a pleasant night with a lady, or subject to each other's fancy. If he were to be a lord of the North, he would have to make the best of the situation when the time came. Tegan turned from the window and made his way down the corridor of the keep.